While the 24 valve isn't quite as well respected from a reliability standpoint, it's still considered one of the most reliable modern day diesel engines, and rightfully so. Hey guys, Jake from 80/20 Media here. I just wrapped up a video discussing common problems and reliability with the legendary 5.9 Cummins 12 valve. So now it's only fair to talk about its successor, the 5.9 Cummins 24 valve. While the 24 valve isn't quite as well respected from a reliability standpoint, it's still considered one of the most reliable modern day diesel engines, and rightfully so. The 24 valve is extremely reliable, but it has tough shoes to fill after coming from the 12 valve. The 5.9 Cummins 24 valve was released in 1998 and a half and lasted all the way through 2007 and had a number of meaningful changes compared to the 12 valve. Most importantly, it was changed from a 12 valve engine with 2 valves per cylinder to a 24 valve engine with 4 valves per cylinder. But in addition to that, one of the greatest things about the 12 valve is that it was a very heavily mechanical engine. The injection pump was mechanical, and that's one of the biggest changes now with the 24 valve is, in addition to doubling the number of valves, they switched from a mechanical injection system to the VP44, which is an electronic injection system. In addition to that, they used a couple different turbochargers from Holset that were updated from the ones used in the 12 valve. Now, with the fueling system being changed to electronic, similar to the 12 valve, the 24 valve did also sort of have 2 generations within it. From 1998 and a half through 2002, it used the VP44 injection pump. And then from 2003 to 2007, it switched to the Bosch CP3 electronic injection pump. And that is a meaningful change, as we'll go ahead and discuss later, notably because the CP3 is a lot more reliable than the VP44 is. The 24 valve is interesting in the sense that it had 0 emissions equipment. Up until 2004.5, when they went ahead and added catalytic converters on it, and I think that was only in certain areas that required it. At the same time, you had the 6.0 Power Stroke as well as the LLY Duramax that were both getting the addition of exhaust gas recirculation. But because of the fueling setup and some of the other unique design aspects to the 24 valve, Dodge was actually able to pass the emissions regulations with the 5.9 Cummins without adding exhaust gas recirculation. So on any 5.9 Cummins, the most you're gonna find from an emissions standpoint is a catalytic converter, which is a huge win from a reliability standpoint, because even the EGR systems on these older, still considered pre-emissions diesels are problematic, which leads to them being frequently deleted. Looking at the 6.0 Power Stroke is a prime example, which has a number of problems with the EGR cooler, the EGR valve, and all of those emissions components that are tied into it. So with all of that background, let's go ahead and talk about the problems that the 5.9 Cummins 24 valve does have. The first and most notable thing is with the lift pump as well as with the injection pump, and most specifically the VP44 injection pump. So all of the 1998 and a half until 2004 models had a lift pump located within the engine bay. The lift pump was attached to the engine block, and because of where it was located, it was subject to a lot of heat, and it also had to pull the gas a very long way. since it was in the engine and the gas tank is all the way at the back of the vehicle. When you combine the distance that it had to pull the gas from along with the high heat environment that it was in, the lift pump failed frequently on the 2004 and prior models. When the lift pump would fail, it would put a lot of pressure on the VP44 pump, essentially starving it, which would then cause the VP44 to fail. The VP44 itself does fail relatively frequently, even when the lift pump doesn't, but one of the main causes of the VP44 failing is the lift pump. In 2003 and onwards, they replaced the VP44 with the CP3, which the CP3 is probably the best and most reliable fuel injection system out there for diesel engines, probably even today, since the CP 4.2 has had a lot of problems. Ultimately, the switch to CP3 was extremely positive and was a really good move for the 5.9 Cummins and added a lot more reliability with respect to the fueling system. Those models with the CP3 are a little bit more desirable. A new VP44 is going to run you a little over $1,000, and a new lift pump is going to cost about $300. So if you do have an issue with those two components on the newer engines, it's going to be a somewhat expensive repair to get those two things replaced. The CP3 can fail as well when the lift pump does. It's not quite as common just because the CP3 is a bit stronger, but it still can happen. It typically will not happen on the 2005 plus models that have the relocated lift pump. Moving on to the second problem, one of the things that you'll notice is the majority of the problems with the 5.9 24 valve are with the fueling system. The second most common problem is leaking fuel injectors. Injectors are typically somewhat of a maintenance item once engines get to higher mileage. Leaking injectors is not uncommon for really any direct injected vehicle, especially diesels. On the Cummins 24 valve, you typically only run into this issue once you get to high mileage or have really old injectors. We typically don't see this happening unless you have 150,000 plus miles on your injectors. The problem with injectors is they're expensive. A new set of injectors is going to run you about $1,000, but you can at least be thankful that the 5.9 Cummins is an inline six and not a V8. Otherwise, it would be a lot more expensive to get two more injectors for it. So there's a small win there. As you're looking at a 5.9 Cummins, especially older ones that are at higher mileage, replacing the fuel injectors is going to be something that needs to happen, whether it's at 150,000 or 200,000 miles. And it's just something to be aware of because they are on the more expensive end of repairs for this engine. Moving on to the third common problem, we have a cracked exhaust manifold. Since the 5.9 Cummins is an inline six engine, the exhaust manifold is one manifold for all 6 cylinders, and so as you can imagine, it's a relatively long manifold. And it's also made out of cast iron, and cast iron isn't as great at holding up to continuous heat cycles, and so it doesn't expand and contract as well as other metals do when it's heated up and cooled down. When you combine just the material that it's made with, along with the length of the exhaust manifold, it is prone to cracking. Initial cracks might not be that noticeable. However, once a crack does occur, it usually will pretty quickly become a larger crack, and what you're going to end up getting is an exhaust leak or a vacuum leak, which is going to result in a number of performance-related issues with acceleration, idling, and just overall rough running conditions. The exhaust manifolds are a pretty common problem. Again, you'll typically see these with higher mileage engines, so it's just something to keep in mind. When they do fail, it's common to go ahead and upgrade them to a higher flowing exhaust manifold, as well as one that's made with a little bit more durable of a material. Doing so is going to run you about $500 in parts. It's not the most expensive problem out there, but it is something that you're probably going to run into at one point or another if you have one of these engines and you're getting up there in terms of mileage, or if it hasn't been replaced in a while. The fourth problem is relatively minor, but also is relatively frequent in occurrence, and that's with the accelerator pedal position sensor. Now, this isn't really as much of an engine problem as it is a sensor issue with the sensor that's located within the cabin of the vehicle. But the accelerator pedal position sensor, as it suggests, measures where the pedal position is at to be able to then control the throttle body and how much air is entering the engine. When this fails, you're going to get a lot of surging and lunging while you're driving, and it's ultimately going to make the car not drivable at all. And it'll probably make it very difficult, but also very dangerous to drive just because it does surge and lunge back and forth in a very uncontrollable manner. So it's pretty easy to diagnose when this happens. A sensor is about $100 to $200. It's pretty easy to replace it yourself. Ultimately, it is a common problem, but it's not something that's very major, that's very expensive, or that leads to any other problems with these vehicles. And the last thing on our list is a little bit unique. If you've read about 5.9 Cummins and specifically the 24 valve, you've probably heard of the number 53 engine blocks. Cummins had two different manufacturers that manufactured the engine blocks for the 5.9 Cummins 24 valve. One of them was located in Brazil. The Brazilian company that was manufacturing them had somewhat of a manufacturing default that occurred on vehicles that were manufactured anywhere from 1999 until 2001. The problem was with the water jacket walls. The water jacket walls were made too thin, which can lead to the block cracking. If you do a lot of heavy towing, if you run into any issues with your coolant pressure, if you don't let the engine warm up properly before you start driving it, if you tune it or heavily modify it, ultimately you're increasing the risk of running to an issue with the block cracking. When the block cracks, you're going to get a coolant leak out of the block, and you're ultimately going to have to get a new block. And so this can lead to a pretty significant repair bill. So if you are looking at something in the 1999 to 2001 range, you'll want to take a look at the block casting number and see if it starts with the number 53, and if it does, you'll want to be a little bit more cautious and probably a bit hesitant to purchase that vehicle, just because the number 53 blocks do crack pretty frequently. So that's really the only catastrophic problem that these engines had, and it's really less of a problem and more of a manufacturing defect that occurred for a short window of time. There are 5.9 Cummins with the 53 blocks still out there. It's just something to be aware of and something to avoid if you're looking at buying one. Outside of issues with the number 53 block, really the only issues you run into on this engine are with the fueling system, and more specifically with the VP44, as well as with the lift pump that's located within the engine bay. The fuel injectors too are another fueling related problem, and anything fueling related can be relatively expensive to fix, so just keep that in mind. But outside of issues with the fueling system, these engines are extremely reliable. They're very bulletproof. There's not really anything that's going to lead them to fail at an early mileage level. These engines can easily go 350,000 miles without any problems, especially if you have one of the later model ones that has the relocated lift pump and the CP3 fuel pump. You're absolutely golden from a reliability standpoint, which makes these also one of the most desirable diesel engines of today's time. With the 24 valve, you get it in a newer vehicle that's got a little bit more of the comfort features that we are used to nowadays. While a 12 valve is a great engine, you're also getting it in a little bit older of a vehicle that's gonna have a number of other problems with the suspension and all of the other vehicle and chassis components. If you're looking for an extremely reliable diesel engine that's pre-emissions, doesn't have any emissions equipment, and has very little things that can go wrong and lead to expensive repairs, the 5.9 Cummins 24 valve is a fantastic engine, and one that we certainly would absolutely recommend if you're looking at getting an older diesel and you want a reliable diesel. I say that as being an owner of a 7.3 Power Stroke. I don't tend to have a bias towards one manufacturer or another, and I 100% would buy a 5.9 Cummins 24 valve. That wraps it up on our 5.9 Cummins series with respect to problems and reliability. We will go ahead and do modification guides for both of these engines because both of them are highly modifiable. If you're interested in learning about mods for the 12 valve and the 24 valve, please subscribe to our channel and let us know you appreciate this content by clicking the like button. Stay tuned for our next Cummins videos.